Hello, you're listening to the Inishowen History Podcast with me, Seán Beattie. This is the first of what I hope will be many podcasts on local history, folklore and heritage. I will share this online on my website, historyofdonegal.com. This first episode features an archived radio recording from possibly the 1980s made by Father Jackie Fitzgerald on the topic of the Lough Swilly Railway. Officially known as the Londonderry and Lough Swilly Railway, it made its first stop at the terminus in Carndonagh in 1901, thus connecting Inishowen with the national rail network. Father Jackie Fitzgerald was a rail enthusiast, and he recalls journeys he made on the line, fondly recording memories of a time that has passed. A native of Buncrana, he ministered as a priest in the Archdiocese of San Antonio in Texas, USA. He was ordained in Carlow in 1954 and lectured in sociology and history in America. He spoke Spanish and French fluently and wrote extensively on Inishowen history and on religious themes, particularly during his retirement in Inishowen. The talk was first broadcast on a local station called the Northwest Community Radio, NWCR, at a time when pirate stations had a huge audience nationally. With the passage of legislation regulating commercial broadcasting, such stations became the forerunner of the county and regional stations which now serve the entire country. Contributors usually recorded their stories on tape, and as such, the sound quality of this recording reflects that, as you will hear. This recording is of 45 minutes duration, and I wish to thank Ian Kelly, Carndonagh, who supplied me with the original cassette tape. It is one of a mere handful of NWCR broadcasts that have been archived and forms an important part of the history of radio broadcasting in the county. And now, here is Father Jackie Fitzgerald.
This is Father Jackie Fitzgerald at the green microphone of NWCR here in Buncrana to tell you the story of the Lough Swilly Railway. What does the Lough Swilly Railway mean to us? We must admit a great deal. It is a link with our past for one thing, and Derry City for another. Two connections we would never ever want to see broken. The Lough Swilly Railway was also the fastest narrow gauge railway in the entire world. The second longest system in Ireland and the furthest north. Its fascinating story began officially on the 26th of June, 1853, when its Act of Incorporation was first received. Authority was given, and the railway was on its way. The Lough Foyle and Lough Swilly Railway Company had been provisionally registered since 1852. The company was renamed during the passage of the Act through Parliament, and emerged as the Londonderry and Lough Swilly Railway Company. Its original destination was to a stone pier at Farland Point in County Donegal. That point served as a base for a fleet of sailing boats plying the many harbours lining the shores of our lovely lough, from which the railway had taken its name. The original plans were to connect Derry City with that busy commercial pier by laying 8 3/4 miles of 5-foot 3-inch broad gauge track. shortage of capital delayed the project again and again. And it was not until the 31st of December 1863 that the great green steam engine with Lough Swilly Railway written proudly on its shoulders finally reached that destination. As its spikes were driven and the track slowly crept out into Donegal, a further decision was taken that the company would benefit by an extension of the line. The permanent way then ran to Buncrana, arriving there on the 10th of December, 1864. On the 30th of June, 1883, the Letterkenny Railway, under construction officially since 1860, finally made junction with the Lough Swilly Railway at Tuban. It was a 3-foot narrow gauge line. An act of 1880 had already given authority to the Lough Swilly Company to regauge their line in anticipation. The Lough Swilly was always keen to extend to Letterkenny, and now the two lines could be operated at the one unit envisaged. The wheelbases of the Lough Swilly's large broad gauge engines were adopted to narrow gauge requirements. The entire conversion was accomplished in 1885, leaving the Lough Swilly Railway at that time the fastest narrow gauge railway in the world. The Lough Swilly Railway, by an act of 1896, obtained 2 further government-built extensions. The first of 18 miles through the wildest and loveliest of mountain scenery was on north again from Buncrana to Carndonagh. It opened on the 1st of July, 1901. The second was to the west and still more ambitious, running 49 miles out to the fishing village of Burton Port on our wild Atlantic coast. The Lough Swilly was now an old train, well run, that cast its magic spell all across this land of Tyrconnell, as it moved smoothly and strongly over its shining steel rails. Its route was scenic and colourful. Its sturdily built station houses still stand, splendid survivals of 19th century railway elegance and architecture. Its comings and goings regulated the whole countryside, and farmers for a century set their clocks by it. Donegal was a region famous for its scenery. Great areas of mountains, deep glens and many lakes. The beautifully situated seaside resorts along the much indented coast now lay at the feet of the Lough Swilly Railway. Its working mileage of 99.5 miles faced the exciting and rewarding prospect of moving both passengers and freight. Those who sought health and holiday gaiety in the many fascinating coastal resorts along its route. Those who wished to take gun and rod into the Highlands, or just simply to travel, were now drawn irresistibly to the famous Lough Swilly Railway. On the 25th of February 1906, a strong cross wind lifted 2 carriages as the train crossed the Owen Carroll Viaduct. The carriages were held in place by the strong iron railings. The Lough Swilly Railway was always in trouble. The move from standard gauge to narrow gauge saved it from bankruptcy. Trouble struck within months of the changeover. On the 2nd of January 1884, a mixed train from Tuban Junction to Letterkenny, crawling slowly across the embankment at Pluck Village Station, on a night of wild winter gales, was derailed. All carriages except the engine lay in the field close to the bridge that spans the Swilly River. Major General C.S. Hutchinson, who investigated, made the point that shorter carriages should be used. His sound advice was ignored, and indeed in the years ahead the company went on to use even longer bogie stock. Mercifully, no one was hurt in that blow-off. On Sunday the 21st of June 1891, a head-on collision at Springtown between a troop special out of Derry bound for Donegal and an empty train resulted in the death of the entire engine crew. The whole of our Donegal coast lies wide open to the full force of the Atlantic gales, and danger remained as an ever-present factor in the operations of the railway. On Christmas Day 1922, 2 carriages were blown off the line at Dunfanaghy Road. Hurricane-force winds ripping in from the west on the 7th of February 1923 suddenly blasted across the Rosses to derail the 8:30 train between Kincashla and Crawley. It plunged all the carriages headlong down an 8-foot embankment. This time again, luck held out, and no one, mercifully, was killed. In utter darkness, on the 25th of January 1925, the 5:15 p.m. out of Derry City to Burton Port roared through the night, and it passed through Kilmacrennan Station at 7:25 p.m., right on time. It was due to cross the high Owen Carrow Viaduct above rugged Barnes Gap at 8 p.m. It became the most tragic disaster in the railway's history. 4 passengers were killed and 4 seriously injured when icy winds boldly lifted the train from the rails. Dawn showed the carriages crushed in and suspended in midair below the viaduct. The first thing I saw was the first carriage seeming to rise from the rails. I said to the driver, "There is harm done this night," records the footman. The driver, Robert McGuinness, takes up the story. After travelling about 60 yards over the viaduct, I looked back and, seeing the lights of the guard's van, considered everything was all right. The wind was gusty, and I proceeded at ordinary reduced speed. I then cast another look back and noticed that carriage number 11 was off the line and raised in the air. The impact had taken away the complete roof of one carriage, and all the passengers dropped to the jagged rocks far below, to be injured still further by falling masonry and boulders. The Swilly profited by the hard-earned experience, and all carriages on the Burton Port line were hence to be ballasted with cast iron. The story of the line is full of incidents, but none of them were ever as serious as that Owen Carrow disaster. Still undaunted, the Lough Swilly Railway chugged on courageously into the future. I made my own first journey on the Lough Swilly Railway as a boy to Carndonagh. On that first journey with childish glee, led by the hand, I was fairly bowled over at the size of the gleaming engine, the splendour of the carriages with their opulence, silver lights and gushing privacy. I fell in love with the Lough Swilly, and I have never been the same boy since. The richness of the experience lingers on. Today, as my thoughts wander affectionately back over a lifetime of railroading, the things that strike me most were the station houses en route. The one built at Buncrana was a notable example of the railroad's addiction to its glorious past, a survivor of 19th century elegance, and a serviceable centre for arriving and departing passengers. The deep-throated whistle signalled departure as I clutched the ticket stub, and the Lough Swilly slowly shunted out. Rising 1 in 60, I got my first glimpse of the fast-flowing Mill River at Swan's Corn Mills from the high, five-arched, superb masonry bridge. It was an inseparable part of my first intoxication with the railway. And of all natural habitats, that river remains the most beautiful and most seductive. The train rolled east of the town to reach Ballymegana station 2 miles out, with its ridges of red tiles and dressings of yellow brick. It crossed the open bogland to gallop over a single-span lattice girder bridge that leaps the Crana River into Kinnigo Halt. There, to this very day, stories of a ghost train still persist along this lonely, wild stretch of line, seen on at least 3 occasions. The Kinnigo crossing keeper rushed one gusty night to hurriedly open the gates for what he took to be an unannounced special. He was too late, and had passed completely through the gates without leaving a mark. The extension to Carndonagh was on through relatively unpopulous terrain, forever climbing, and a tough nut for a passenger train to crack. The track rose with mountains on each side as it crossed into Dumfries Station, set into the most spectacular of scenery, where the reed-girted Minchaloch reflected the snow-sprinkled twin peaks of Barnanmore and Barnanbug, known colloquially as the King and Queen. Following the valley of the Clonmany River, it puffed into Clonmany Station across the three-arched Mindorn Bridge and level crossings of Ballylippen and Rashini. The next 2 stations were favourites of the many tourists who visited Ballylippen's magnificent strand. Rashini was the furthest north railway station in Ireland. The last 4 miles of the Carndonagh extension skirts the magnificent coast of Trabega Bay to its last official halt at Carndonagh, built thoughtfully as an overbridge to serve the homes on Colin Hill. To begin the final 1.5 mile run down into Carndonagh, the railway turned southeast, roaring fast downhill through the rich, fertile hinterland. It came slowly whistling and gently braking to a stop at the platform of a solid railway station built in 1901. That terminus was the end of the line for the now fastest and most northern narrow-gauge railway system in all Ireland. The Carndonagh extension sadly closed amid grim tales of ruin and utter desolation in 1935. The slowness of the Lough Swilly Railway was not because it was incapable of great speed, but because it became a gossip. All along the line it stopped to exchange the latest at every station. No matter how pressing the emergency, there seemed to be always time to get out, smoke a cigarette, and visit the refreshment bar. The railway had 1,001 things on its mind, all of them worthy. The engine had to get water from the tanks, the fire had to be fueled, and it had to wait for the mailbags. Pieces of track from Derry to Buncrana were well known as remarkable sections where the dwaddling engine driver obeying strict safety rules, often slowed the train to a walk. Many of the reasons were enchanting, but none conducive to swift passage for the seated passenger. The terminus at Derry City was closed to the harbour and docks. The train curved northwest as it left to begin the best railroad journey in Ireland, heading for Donegal along a route so colourful that it still evokes deep nostalgic memories for many. Gallia Road Station, built in 1880, was 2 miles out through Collin and Bridgend to Burnfoot. The line was straight and level. Burnfoot Station, in existence since 1864, was often flooded. Prior to the reclamation of the land by the impressive Trady, Inch and Farland embankments, high tides ran to within yards of the village street. On this run, one met the most courteous porters, conductors, and ticket collectors imaginable, to leave a lasting impression. It's not every railway that could hold so fast to an ideal through 100 years of our history's fastest century here in Donegal. On it went, rolling and rattling down the scenic shores of Lough Swilly, giving its own impeccable service. The line followed the course of 2 rivers to reach Tubin Junction, and less than a mile further on was sturdy Inch Station, built in 1864, with Lamberton's Halt, built to serve a cluster of houses in 1927. The line ran through the romantic woods at Glengolan to reach Fawn Station, whose unique charm retains much of a bygone era, and connect with the ferry boat services at the ferry pier. Freight and passenger service operated traditionally in conjunction with the railway. Curving suddenly right through a massive rock cutting, the iron wheels finally reached that much exposed coast of Lough Swilly. Open to many a northwest gale on many a winter's night, this section of line is now in clear sight of Buncrana town. The wheels have been lapped by many a high spring tide as they rushed on and on north into flaming sunsets and Buncrana's impressive 2-story granite station, always the busiest in the entire system. The advent of the Lough Swilly Railway on the 10th of September 1864 revitalized that once important Elizabethan town. Far to the west, on the distant skyline, the white quartz peaks of Errigal and Muckish loomed and beckoned. The extension of the railway to Burnfoot in that direction was a triumph of engineering. The engine curving left out of Tubin Junction past the historic Green On of Ada, towering forever on the hill above the station. It rushed across the top of the great Trady embankment for a mile into its own past, where the Trady and Farland banks meet just after leaving Trady Station. That first old line to Farland Point still slopes away gently to its terminus, a quarter of a mile away. Clear traces of its low embankment on the sandy Swilly shore can still be seen. The wall of its old turntable pit survives. The massive stone facing is in almost perfect condition. A few stones are nostalgic reminders of the old Farland Point pier that saw the arrival of the very first Lough Swilly train in 1863. Rising at 1 in 49 through a deep earth cutting, it goes rolling into the single station platform at Carone. scaring the fox and the rabbits, then briskly approaches the blanket nook for a brief look at the migrant swans on that fascinating inlet of Lough Swilly. 3 miles ahead lay Newton Cunningham, the most important intermediate stop, with extensive goods yards, cattle pens, water storage tanks, and an 1883 two-story station house. Travelling on a westerly course through the rich farmlands of the Lagan, it entered Manor Cunningham Station, built too in 1883. Before it could descend to sway across those long salt flats and mud banks where the Swilly River meets Lough Swilly, it had to pass through the genial and relaxed Pluck village station. Now losing height rapidly at 1:50 along the way, and quickly covering these last 4 miles into Letterkenny Station, built at the east end of town that same year of 1883. To move on out west, the Lough Swilly had to circumvent Letterkenny, heading straight across flat land to Old Town Station, before it could head north through the beautiful tree-sheltered Swilly Valley to enter New Mills Station. This was the start of the long, arduous climb through a lovely landscape along the slopes of the valley to Foxhall Station, built in 1903. Churchill Station, built that same year, was the next stop in the Glacia Valley. When the sparkling river was crossed, there was again difficult terrain to be negotiated, with a summit 340 feet above sea level to be reached. That climb was 1 in 50 before the rapid descent into Kilmacrennan Station. Many special excursion trains, polished to a sheen, were to enter, refuel, and leave Kilmacrennan Station. Built also in 1903, it was the stop for the Holy Well at Doon, which was and remains the scene of many pilgrimages down the years. The Lough Swilly was now curving north-west, heading for Stragaddy and the level crossing at Barnes. The railway crossed the road at Barnes Gap by a viaduct 60 foot high, of 3 60-foot spans set into the rock-strewn slopes. In broad view were now Errigal and Muckish. The Owencarrow River flows north-east, linking lovely Lough Veigh to the beautiful Glen Lough. The masterpiece of engineering by any standards, known as the Owencarrow Viaduct, spans the valley with 380 yards of steel and concrete. Subjected to those high winds from our Atlantic coast that gust through the Barnes Gap and valleys, trains always crossed warily. Below, in the wild and alluring land of moorland and bog, stood Craighlaw Station amid the heather, with its fine, storied mountain background to interest the antiquarian and the historian. The tourist havens of Mulroy and Sheephaven Bay below are lashed and fretted by the Atlantic, and the track skirts along sandy beaches all the long way into Falcarra Station, built again in 1903. 3 miles beyond this most magnificent of mountain scenery stands Cashel-Nagore Station, the highest point in the entire railway system. 420 feet above sea level, the white cone of Errigal Mountain to the north dominates this fairyland scene of scattered, whitewashed cottages, their thatched roofs lashed down against the wild winter gales. Weedore Station, again of the 1903 vintage, lies 6 miles ahead to serve scenic Bloody Foreland, Derrybeg and Dunlewy. Running on along the island-studded coast at Innisfree Bay, the train suddenly went curving southwest and entered the single-station platform at Crawley, built also in 1903. The fish wait on silent sidings at Burton Port, destined for the faraway tables of Europe. To get to them, the spinning iron wheels rapidly crossed the treeless, boulder-strewn Rosses. In its eagerness to reach the coast, the Lough Swilly seemed to have ignored sizable Annagry and Dunlow. Halfway to the sea, it settled for a stop at Kincashla Road, letting off steam between 2 small lochs of ravishing beauty, glittering a mile inland from the rugged, indented and incomparable beauty of the coastline at Kedu Strand. The Lough Swilly Railway's whistle sang its final note of urgency as it dipped down into Burton Port to pass fish-curing stations, screaming seagulls, fish-packing plants and fishing boats, coming slowly to a halt before the single platform at the harbour in the tang of the Atlantic Ocean, where it breaks and foams along our scenic Donegal coast. Death came quickly to the Lough Swilly Railway. I lived in the twilight of the railroad and in the going down of its sun. They seemed to disappear overnight. The trains were suddenly gone, and the station houses remained, with their forlorn waiting rooms. No Hollywood director could have improved on the deathbed scene of the Lough Swilly. Its startings and arrivals with regularity and precision had become such a vital part of our lives that never again to hear its whistle was like death itself. Like all Irish trains, it had a character all its own that has passed forever into lore and verse. Whatever its charms, and there were many, road competition, 2 world wars in our fast-moving century, hard economic facts, and the division of Ireland hastened its end. Times change, and the aeroplane had become a jet in the sky. The very quality that had endeared the Lough Swilly to us, its traditionalism, became its death rattle. It loved ritual, and it loved the past. It seemed to fade-proof to me, with its liturgical qualities still intact, even in the strong light of this century. It became evident that the railway, reduced to what it had been in 1883, a total of 30 3/4 miles of unprofitable track, was sick, and the company tirelessly engaged in diagnosis. The increased road service was carrying the once proud railway on its back. It was living on borrowed time, and death seemed in the air. The end was inevitable when a formal application to the 2 governments for the necessary closure orders came in 1953. There was no stay of execution. Its termination was a landmark in Irish railway history. Although in many places our railways still enjoy good health, rolling on at a profit. The Lough Swilly Railway came to an end on the 8th of August, 1953. A newspaper reporter stood on the footplate of the last train into Derry City from Donegal. As a principal actor in the deathbed scene, When it swayed across the points at Pennyburn, crossing and through the gates past sidings and yards and engine sheds, to break gently to a final stop beside the long white ribbon of the platform at Strand Road Station. It had served Donegal and Derry for exactly 100 years. Whatever its failings down the years, its sins are now forgiven. It was well prepared for its final hour of splendour. On the left stood the adjoining track, and there one saw parked a few rail tank cars and coupled to them a few passenger coaches, empty, old and of an indefinite colour. Silent reminders of the days when the old station was alive with the laughter of thousands of excursionists and the faded coaches newer. With the driver's rag in his hand, Robert Turner made the last adjustment to his engine, and the train pulled up. That's the end, he smiled. The century of service ended quietly, just like that. There was, however, something ineffably sad about the death of the Lough Swilly Railway. It deserved a well-earned round of applause. I will miss it greatly, and all the old excitement. It had qualities that none can ever take away, and virtues that have never been surpassed. The sound that its wheels made through the hills of Donegal for a century was the sound of majesty, punctuality, stability, and success. Its journeys had value in themselves as it moved over the well-laid track. They were not just devices for saving time, which in the end never got saved anyway. It offered the traveller advantages and conveniences never to be had in any other form of transport. Unlike the aeroplane, it could slow down in bad weather. Unlike the car, it didn't have to be steered. Unlike the bus, it didn't have to pull over to the right every few minutes to pass what was up ahead. I remain torn between past and present, a common failing in a historian who fell in love with the sound of its shrieking whistle, the brightness of its carriages, and the brilliance of its station houses. Even when its whistle dwindled to little more than a faint pooping in the hills, the lights in the station houses all gone out, and the trains withdrawn from service, my love endures. I could never conceive of my world without its railroad station houses, engines, trucks, buffers, and signal boxes. I remember feeling at the time that its deathbed scene had been overplayed and that it belonged to another century. The scene remains a lingering pain in the heart for all lovers of this railway. I shall miss seeing the first shafts of morning light in the trackside glades at Carndonagh, and the many migrant swans at Inch. I shall miss the friendly intimacy of the vanished and elegantly mannered conductors and ticket collectors in faded blue. I shall miss the porters, arms full of red hurricane lamps, on their way to decorate the white crossing gates with their honoured trappings. I shall miss the peaceful stretches of the Owen Killer River along the embankment at Swan's Corn Mills, and the reflection of the great engine in the waters of Meacha Lough, where the kingfisher dipped in jewelled flight. Those sell-out excursions to the holy well of Doon, and the ebullient friendliness of the passengers in its years of wonder, I miss. The reassuring clasp of a grandfather's hand I missed most of all. When it came to travelling on the Lough Swilly, he hadn't a second-class bone in his body. In the sadness of all last things, its joys, its sorrows, and its triumphs, it has linked Donegal's generations in an indestructible chain. It cast its reliable spell across the land in war and peace, carrying 10,000 tightly packed visitors to Buncrana for the royal visit of King Edward and Queen Alexandra. This railroad of class, with its fine sense of public relations, named an engine after the king, and with a royal coach, carried him and his entourage right regally into Derry City. When Lough Swilly became a naval base during the First World War, a boom built across the entrance virtually closed it to all shipping, and the fish traffic ceased. Thousands of tons of Swilly herring were no longer available for European markets. Tourist traffic fell away as excursion trains became troop trains to and from the large military camps that now lined the lough. When the war ended, it became obvious that following the Easter Rising in 1916, British rule in Ireland was rapidly coming to an end. In the civil disorders which followed, train crews were threatened with violence or death if they conveyed troops or police. The line remained closed for weeks on end. Following the division of Ireland, the Troubles became a civil war. Trains were raided for supplies and set ablaze. They often travelled through the whine of bullets with passengers lying on the floor. Bridges were blown up and trains derailed. When the smoke cleared, the gallant little Lough Swilly Railway had its headquarters in Derry City, and the greater part of its track mileage 3 miles away, across the border, and under the flag of the new Irish Free State. This affected the railway in many peculiar ways during the Second World War, because most of it was now in a neutral country. The closure of the entire Burtonport extension was ordered on the 3rd of June 1940. Petrol became scarcer as the war progressed, and the Letterkenny-Gweedore section was reopened on the 3rd of February 1941. In the acute shortage of coal, turf and wood were used. Derry City was attacked by German aircraft in 1941. One immediate result was the large immigration of people to Donegal. Damage had been done in the raid to the railway headquarters. Excursion trains were always a speciality of the Lough Swilly Railway during its lifetime. All through the war, people were keener than ever to get to the seaside from the city. The railway was hard at work hauling packed trains to Vaughan and Buncrana. One last gallant gesture in 1953 was typical of the company. It was an excursion train that took children to the seaside. A magnificent railway, a magnificent gesture. Enough indeed to make the heart throb with memories of bygone glories. It was the engine driver himself who finally broke up the party on the 8th of August, 1953. The train itself was watched by hardly a score of people as it rumbled over the level crossing and along the final few hundred yards of grass-grown track into the almost roofless terminus. The platform at which it drew up was deserted. He simply stepped down from his engine, adjusted his cap, and walked away. My heart is warm with the friends I make, and better friends I'll not be knowing. Yet there isn't a train I wouldn't take, no matter where it's going. The Lough Swilly Railway is dead and gone. In my pleasant memories, it lingers on. That extraordinary train has passed into song and story, to remain still a lingering pain in all our hearts, eternally echoing the past grandeur of the rails. The Lough Swilly Railway served us for 100 years in a variety of liveries beneath its shining copel varnish. Its favourite colour seems, however, to have been the everlasting green for this all-time pride of Irish railways. It was a throwback to that golden age of railroading when the passenger was king, and it thundered across the Owen Carroll Viaduct, on through the Donegal hills, its cinders red on the sky, across the Swilly shores. The excursion trains were the proudest feature of the railroad. The conveniences of the railways were always well advertised with the rapturous experience of travelling the rails. The story of the Lough Swilly Railway's survival against all odds is immensely complex and mysterious, like the backing up of a train in the night. It reveals that this land, without its railway service and freight offices ablaze with light, is now a land in decline. In lore and legend, the Lough Swilly Railway will never die. Its heavy wooden sleepers lit many a Shanahy's winter fire, where stories of the broken-hearted wail of its whistle were heard again rushing on through the night, hauling fish, potatoes, newsprint, stout, ice, tobacco, cigarettes and ice cream with the vanished army and navy personnel of two great world wars. That one well-conducted institution regulated everything. In Donegal's endless history, it will retain that well-earned place. It is forever crossing the viaduct at Barnes Gap, rattling round Muckish, its engines steaming, bustling and butting across the storm-tossed Rosses to sway and coast into Burtonport. Children will always wave up from the dazzling golden sands at Fawn to that proud and gleaming green engine. And for me, those shining steel rails will go running endlessly on and on into the stunning beauty of God's purple Lough Swilly sunset. And on gusty nights when clouds are low, its ghost still thunders through Kinnegall.
That was Father Jackie Fitzgerald on NWCR. If you like this podcast, visit my website, historyofdonegal.com, for more posts on local Inishowen history. Until the next time.